you've explained why there is taxation, even though governments do not rely on taxation or require taxation in order to be able to spend currency. Why is it that they sell bonds? Why do they? If that is, why are they borrowing money from the broader community in order to is it to finance their operations, or for some other reason?
Okay, well, first, of course, a sovereign government really can't borrow, because what it is doing is accepting back its own IOUs. If you had given your IOU to your neighbor because you borrowed some sugar, when you get it back, okay, I mean, could you borrow it back? No, you can't borrow back your IOU. When you return the sugar, you get the IOU back, and you tear it up and throw it away.
But if they gave me that IOU back, I could go to another neighbour and give them the IOU and get more sugar.
Well, perhaps, but you also could just write a new one, which is what the government does. The government, Bill talked about how when the government receives its paper currency back, it shreds it. Well, what it does is it looks at the currency, says, this one's sort of shot, we'll shred that one.
We have polymer notes now that last longer.
Okay, or this one's good, let's keep it on the shelf. That would be exactly the same as you keeping your own IOU on the shelf until just to save you the all of the trouble of writing IOU again. So for the government, receiving its own IOUs is just like getting a piece of paper. That's all it is for the government. So the government would never borrow back its own IOUs. This would make no sense whatsoever. It'd be even sillier than collecting its IOUs in order to spend them. Okay, let's borrow our own IOUs in order to spend. So the government doesn't really borrow. So why does it issue bonds? The reason is because when the government credits your bank account, let's say you're a retiree, you're getting your Social Security payment, it credits your bank account. At the same time, it credits your bank's assets, which are reserves at your central bank. Okay, so simultaneously it has to credit two sides of your bank's balance sheet. One is your deposit, that's the bank's liability. The other side is bank reserves, that's the bank's asset that offsets it. Now, the problem from the bank's perspective of reserves is they earn very little interest. Depending on the country, in the United States, until a year ago, they earned zero. So banks are sitting there with these assets, which are credits to their reserve account, that earn very little to nothing. They don't want to hold assets that earn almost nothing or nothing. So what they do is they offer them, they try to trade them for earning assets. And the first place they turn is the overnight market. It's called the Fed funds market in the United States, and it's called
Well, it's just the overnight market.
Okay, the overnight market in Australia. See, we're more in a minute. The Fed funds market in the United States. So they offer reserves in the Fed funds market. It will be other banks that are short reserves that will try to borrow those. Now, if all banks have enough reserves, then when one bank is offering the extra reserves in the overnight market, nobody wants them. Nobody bids for them. So the problem is the interest rate in the overnight market, which we call the Fed funds rate and you call the cash rate, is bid down below the central bank's target. So there's only one way to keep that
It's
rate
to try
up.
to get someone to take
Yes.
the loan.
So because I might offer them for 5%, no takers, I offer 4, 3, 2, 1, okay, it drops to 0 because there's no one who wants the reserves. So the central bank will have to be the one who offers to take them. Okay? And that's how the central bank keeps the interest rate from going below its target rate. So if the central bank's target is, let's just say, for example, 3%, then it's got to drain the extra reserves to keep the rate from falling below the 3% target. How does it take those reserves back? It sells bonds. That's how it does it. It sells treasury bonds to take back the extra reserves. Now, if you have a government that is, over the course of the year, continually crediting more accounts than it debits, what we call that is a budget deficit, because it means that they are spending more than they receive in taxes. So they're crediting more accounts than they debit. They're continually creating more reserves on a continuous basis. Those have to be drained by the central bank. The central bank has a limited supply of treasury bonds because it doesn't create these things. The central bank buys and sells them. They don't create them. They will very quickly run out. Okay. In the United States, we have a budget deficit this year, 1.2 trillion or so. This is by many orders of magnitude bigger than the Fed's stock of Treasury debt that it can sell to drain reserves. So it calls on the Treasury and says, hey, we're running out, we can't sell anymore, you guys have to start selling. So the Treasury will sell bonds to help the central bank to hit its overnight interest rate target. And actually in the United States, and Bill says in Australia too, the central bank and Treasury talk every morning and decide how much each will sell. When the central bank sells it, we call it an open market sale. It's an open market operation. When the Treasury does it, we call it a new issue. But they have exactly the same impact, they serve exactly the same purpose. There is no functional difference between who sells it. It's just that the Treasury can sell an unlimited amount because it creates them. The central bank can only sell what they have. So that is the purpose of bond sales.